Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Steven Universe Retrospectives, and today we're going to be discussing episodes 59 and 60 of Steven Universe, Rising Tides, Crashing Skies, and Keeping It Together. And as always, let's talk about the odd-numbered episode first. Now, the last vlog, I mentioned how this episode was a Ronaldo episode, and how it was probably one of the few Ronaldo episodes that I actually thought was good. Now, I admit that might be personal preference talking, but honestly, I do kind of like this episode. Mostly because it's a little cheap in its execution. Let me explain. The basic premise for Rising Tides, Crashing Skies is that 99% of the episode is a documentary created by Ronaldo. And the premise of the documentary is just him talking about the Crystal Gem's various activities around Beach City. It's like him interviewing different people about their reactions to certain events that have occurred in Beach City, like when the giant hand came down, or when the pizza family went to the temple to have a barbecue with the Crystal Gems and how it saved them, or how they're reacting when they learn that certain threats are tied to the Crystal Gems, so on and so forth. And pretty much throughout the whole documentary, Ronaldo just keeps up the same super serious, I know what's really going on attitude that he typically has. Excuse me a second. Sorry about that. Anyway, like I said, he keeps up the same super serious, I know what's really going on attitude that he normally has at most of his interactions, but it comes with the added joke of just kind of the awkwardness of talking with people. Like, they just kind of, like, when he actually asks them about it, he acts like there's just some big secret that they're all not privy to, except every one of them knows who the Crystal Gems are. And so when he asks them about it, they're just kind of like, oh yeah, I remember that. It was kind of weird, but hey, they're cool. I think it's kind of funny. I especially like when he actually interviews Kiki and Jenny, and Kiki does mention the aforementioned barbecue, but then Jenny comes in and talks about and sees what they're talking about, and then mentions the time when Garnet almost punched her in the face, but she says, I ain't mad though. Again, I think that's kind of what's funny about the episode. Ronaldo acts like this is all just like some super serious, top secret government has to be kept on the down low thing, but it's basic common knowledge to everyone in Beach City. Nobody is surprised by it. They all just think, oh yeah, that's a thing. It's actually kind of amusing in a way. Although, of course, as part of the investigation, Ronaldo does actually talk with Steven, and he wants to know exactly what, and he does actually ask specifics, and Steven does mention how the giant hand came down to Beach City because it was after the Crystal Gems, and so Ronaldo does realize that all the strange weirdness and oddities that occur in Beach City, and all the monsters that the Crystal Gems claim to protect Beach City citizens from, are actually the result of them just being there. So Ronaldo has the brilliant idea to confront the Crystal Gems and tell them they need to vamoose, and he does this while they're in the middle of fighting a crab monster. Yeah, his priorities are skewed. Bottom line, he does end up chewing them out, and while they do end up taking care of the crab monster, when he tells them that all the threats come to Beach City because they're after the Crystal Gem, so their very presence puts innocent people in danger, Garnet ends up saying, you know what, you're right, we're clearly not welcome here, let's just leave. And so, what I love it is that when the other gems object, like, no buts, we're just clearly not wanted, and she just walks away with the other gems following after, and Ronaldo at first pats himself on the back thinking, oh yeah, I did it right, I'm good. And then, but Petey is like, oh, shame, you won't be able to have anything to talk about for your vlog. It's like, or your blog? It's like, oh, Petey, I'm trying to wrap up my documentary. And it's like, yeah, this has to do with your documentary. Since they're the source of all the strange weirdness things, then Beach City is not going to be weird anymore. You're not going to have anything to blog about. At which point, Ronaldo realizes he kind of effed up, and he goes running back and he runs back to the Crystal Gems home and begs him to stay. Which Garnet says, yeah, okay. And so the documentary ends with Ronaldo saying that he saved Beach City by keeping it weird. And it turns out that the whole framing device of the episode is that Steven and the Crystal Gems are watching it, and they even asked Garnet, were we really going to leave Beach City? And Garnet admitted that no, she just wanted to get the camera out of her face. And so the episode ends with Steven giving the documentary its first like on their version of YouTube. So that's a thing. But, okay, yeah, that's the silly part. That's the silly part of this vlog. What about the next episode, Keeping It Together? This one actually kind of has some darker revelations to it. and some actually interesting character developments. Case in point, the episode actually begins with Steve and the Crystal Gems folding laundry. This is to serve a dual purpose. One, Garnet wants to actually have a meeting with Crystal Gems to talk about what their next move is going to be, and the second reason is they kind of need to get the shirts folded, because apparently Steven set up a chore wheel, but it fell apart rather quickly when Pearl wound up crossing out everybody else's names and put her name in every slot. So I think it's funny. I find that amusing. The point is, they need to discuss what to do with Peridot, because, well, while they found her pod, well, they don't know where she is. And the thing is, while they destroyed her means of getting off of Earth, she came to Earth for some reason, and and odds are, as long as she's stuck here, she's gonna still try to do it. And the thing is, they're a bit worried that one of that objective might be to jumpstart the kindergarten, because after all, her previous visits had her wanting to get to the kindergarten for one reason or another. So if she goes to the kindergarten, there's a risk she might want to start it back up again, which Steven wonders what's going to happen there. And as we've seen, the kindergarten is where they grow gems, but it's here where they explain more about the process. In this case, those drill devices that are called injectors, which I might have talked about in an earlier vlog, but don't quote me on that. Apparently, what the injectors do is that they literally drill into the ground and plant what I'm going to call a seed of a gem. The seed will grow and cultivate until it will pop out of the ground like we've seen, but in growing, it sucks all the life from the surrounding earth, pretty much leaving it dry, desolate, and barren, like how we saw the kindergarten how the kindergarten is. And put simply, if Peridot turns the kindergarten back on, they'll continue producing gems, and if they ultimately produce enough, then essentially the kindergarten won't be what happened in the kindergarten will soon be the entire world, until eventually, as Garnet puts it, the planet will be shanked. As such, they realize that it's kind of a priority mission, and so they all decide that they are going to go to the kindergarten and see if they can figure out exactly what Peridot wanted to do. And so they stop folding and all go to the kindergarten, and they all decide to split up and see if they can find what Peridot was looking for. And, well, Steven finds Peridot. It turns out she's right there when they go to investigate, and she's in the middle of doing a long day for something. Although when she's in the middle of talking about it, she notices Steven, which leads to an honestly funny scene where she asks Steven if the other gems are there, and Steven just at first shakes his head for no, but then turns to a nod for yes before he shrugs his shoulders like he's saying, "I'm sorry." It's kind of funny. And immediately the crystal gems go on the offensive and attack Peridot. She immediately makes a run for it, telling them to go ahead, try and attack her. She already got what she wanted. And eventually, while the gems put up a good fight, she manages to get the jump on them and the escape, especially when Amethyst wraps her in her whip and she ends up zapping it. So as such, she flies away, and while Pearl and Amethyst go chasing after her, Garnet holds Steven from doing the same, because, well, the injectors aren't on. She said that she got what she already wanted, but if that thing was to reactivate the kindergarten, then why are all the injectors still dormant? As such, Garnet decides that she wants to further investigate, and so she takes Steven down into that little shaft area. And something of note is that throughout the episode, Steven's actually been asking Garnet more about her status as a fusion. Like, when they were folding shirts, he said, this would be a lot quicker if we had Ruby and Sapphire here. And so, while they're now going through the shaft, Steven's asking questions, like, is the strong part of Garnet Ruby, and the wise part Sapphire? Is she super cool because she's a fusion? And Garnet's just answering to the best of her abilities while still trying to be respectful of Steven, because she knows he's curious. And pretty much she's just talking, and she even talks about how a fusion is just greater than the sum of their parts. That was what makes her awesome. But eventually, as they go down the shaft, they eventually reach that control room that Peridot had access once with the large Robinoid. But it's still dormant. There's still, like, the power source that they smashed the last time they were there is still broken, but there's a new addition to this chamber. These pillars that seem to have been pulled out of the floor and ceiling. They immediately realized that Peridot was probably the one that did this, but they start wondering why. That is until something falls to the floor, falls on Steven. And that something looks like a hand fused to a foot. Which Steven and Garnet are like, what the hell at? And when they say, and as they're and they're discussed, Garnet ends up smashing it, and it soon turns out that this thing is a gem, sort of. Essentially, the arm foot thing was two gem shards fused together. The sight of which horrifies Garnet, made even worse by when they look in the ceiling, they see even more of these things crawling out of the pillars pull out there and falling to the floor. And on top of that, from one large pillar, they see that it's starting to shake and groan until finally it pretty much explodes. And from it, you can see what looks like just this mishmash of various gem shards fly out in the light. But from it, you see a light of what looks like these various beings just reaching out from it and screaming. But they're glitching out because it's like they can't form a form until eventually they take on the form of what looks like a giant hand that clenches into a fist. And when it opens up, the fingers of said fist look like various just limbs all pointing out. Until it finally takes on a physical form. And it looks like this horrific monster made of all these pieces of people and gems wrapped up in a cloth, just crawling on the ground, reaching for Steven and Garnet. And pretty much the whole time, both Steven and Garnet are freaking out. Steven asking, "What are we gonna do? What are we gonna do?" But Garnet is like frozen in place, just her mouth just open in terror. And Steven just saying, "Garnet, come on, come on, what do we do?" But she's still not doing anything. In fact, this thing ends up grabbing Garnet and knocks off her glasses. And you can just see Garnet is just horrified. She just does not know how to react. And when she sees this thing, she actually does verbalize what it is. Apparently, the shards here are deceased crystal gems, pieces of the gems that were lost in the war, and pretty much they were just forced together as part of these, what I'm going to say, experiments. And so when Garnet sees this, she's just naturally horrified and says, "I'm sorry," and she starts to unfuse. Steven immediately tries saying, "Garnet, come on, come on, this isn't like you, come on, we gotta do something about this." And Steven's encouragement does seem to get to Garnet, so before she fully unfuses, she manages to pull herself together enough to grab at the large monster and rip it apart, causing it to poof. As such, she solidifies, and Steven thinks, "Okay, yeah, we won," but Garnet ends up picking up the gem shards and we see a split. Like in this case, we see Garnet picking up the gem, but it's when she talks, it's clear that it's not Garnet speaking. In this case, it's clear that the people talking are Ruby and Sapphire, because some points her voice gets rough and gruff and talking about how this is what Homeworld thinks of fusion, and then she gets calm and demure and says, "We couldn't have known, Rose couldn't have known, no, this is punishment from the rebellion, this isn't their fault," etc., and so on. And Steven ends up calling to Garnet, which seems to snap her out of it and get her back to the right state of mind. However, as before they can actually talk about what's going on, Pearl and Amethyst come down and they say they lost Peridot, but once they see these, I'm going to say, artificial fusions, Garnet pretty much just snaps at them and tells them they gotta poof and bubble all of them, which they ultimately do. As such, the final scene in the episode is back at the temple with Steven doing the laundry, which I think I have not mentioned is that the washer and dryer is in the giant hand of the statue for the temple, which even Steven comments in the scene how they wonder how they work if they don't have any plumbing up there. But pretty much Steven finally does ask Garnet how she's doing, and yeah, she's still pretty shaken as she talks about how those gem monsters essentially were not fusions, that they didn't have a choice in the matter, they were just forced together, that's not fusion, they didn't have a choice, it's just wrong. And at this point, and pretty much Steven kind of leaves it alone, as it does seem to get to Garnet, but he does ask her, "What's fusion like?" And Garnet then responds with, "Well, you fused before," but Steven says, "Well, it's like, but what do you mean all the time?" Right. Right. And Garnet does give a nice speech about how fusion kind of like how she describes fusion is like it's like you don't disappear. You don't. Hold on one second. Again, puppy. Sorry, I heard it barking, and I thought, and I should, and I was just waiting. Anyway, so yeah, like I said, she mentions how you, if you're when you're as a permafusion, it feels like, and you don't feel like you're alone anymore. You're still you, but it's essentially, but you're more, I suppose. And she mentions how, as a fusion, your old names essentially may as well just be the names for your right and left arms. But then Steven kind of asks another question. When you unfuse, do you just disappear? And Garnet pretty much and Garnet says how she embodies Ruby and Sapphire's love, and how as long as they have that, even when they unfuse, she's still there. She's not. She's not. She's still there, and as long as their love holds true, she's not gonna go away for a while. Which I like. I do really like that. And by the end, Steven does kind of get a better understanding of it as when he's been putting away socks, he almost loses one. Garnet grabs it, pairs it up with a blue one, pairs it up with a blue one because that one was red, and says, "No, that's a good not to split up a pair." And the episode ends with them putting it away for the laundry. So, okay, first, rising tides, crashing skies. I love this episode, but I have to fully admit it's kind of stupid. But I think that's kind of why I love it. The episode in this case, I think, takes advantage of Ronaldo's stupidity. Because, put simply, the entire episode's just a cheap documentary. It's poorly edited. It comes from a guy who thinks he's more professional than he actually is. I feel like I'm calling myself out here. And ultimately, it just feels like a very dumb, cheap documentary that's produced by a guy who clearly has absolutely no idea what he's doing, but still likes to come across as if he's the major authority on this. Again, I feel like I'm calling myself out here. But maybe that's why I love the episode so much. But ultimately, I think that's what makes it funny, because you see Ronaldo just trying to be this cool guy, like he is in on these big diabolical secrets, and yet ultimately everything he's reporting on is just common knowledge. When he interviews people, they're like, "Oh yeah, that thing. Yeah, I remember that thing," and no one really bats an eye at it. Yeah, they admit that these things are calamitous in certain regards, but they don't care. When Ronaldo talks to everyone and actually mentions about how the crystal gems may be the cause of all the drama they're dealing with, they're like, whatever, as long as I don't have to deal with all that shit. It's just, they don't care. It's kind of funny. And even by the end, when Ronaldo realizes that the entire point of his blog is because of the crystal gems and and all the crap they get into, he's just like, oh, maybe they shouldn't go anywhere. It's actually kind of funny in that regard. And the whole episode just comes off as cheap. It feels like it really is just from an unprofessional dumbass who thinks he knows more than he really does, when in reality he's just grasping at straws and hoping he picks the long one. Again, I feel like I'm calling myself out here. And as a result, it makes the whole episode funny. It makes it funny because in a way it's kind of sad, but also funny because it's also cheap. I especially love how the documentary ends with Ronaldo begging the crystal gems to stay, and ultimately it does not. And they're like, yeah, okay, only to learn that the crystal gems weren't really going anywhere. Garnet just wanted to get him to go away. It's actually funny. It's actually really funny. And by the end, well, it feels like nothing was accomplished in the episode. At the same time, I can honestly say that kind of is what makes it work. There's really nothing to the episode beyond Ronaldo's stupidity and him trying to go look into what the crystal gems are causing. And in a way, I do kind of like that we do see the people of Beach City's reactions to the crystal gems, which admittedly aren't really anything new, because again, they know the crystal gems, they've dealt with them, and they know, and they can sleep well enough knowing that the crystal gems have their backs. It's just at the same time, the idea of Ronaldo going to them and acting like there's just some big conspiracy that he's the only one in on, it just kind of makes it funny and makes and honestly, it makes an episode that I think is intentionally stupid, honestly entertaining. But that's just my opinion. I can kind of see why people probably wouldn't like it, because even by the end of the episode, I feel like nothing was accomplished. And Ronaldo is still Ronaldo, so he's just kind of an idiot. Although there was one funny scene where when he was interviewing his brother Petey, and he talks about when they were evacuating Beach City during the season 1 finale 2-parter, he apparently cried because he did not want to leave the fry stand. It's hilarious. Sorry, excess coughing crap. But overall, I can easily say I think Rising Tides, Crashing Skies is a dumb episode that really does not add anything if you miss it. I think you'd be in for a good time if you decide to watch it, so there you go. But as for keeping it together, this is where the real meat and potatoes comes in. And this one, again, offers some more plot developments, but also offers more character development, in this case, for Garnet. In terms of plot development, how things are developing is that we get a brief snippet to Peridot and what her, well, I want to say grand plan was. As in this case, when the crystal gems catch her at the kindergarten, she says she... Hold on a sec. Sorry about that coughing fit. Anyway, like I said, she says she already came here she already got what she wanted, but we don't know what that thing is that she wanted. Hold on again. Sorry about that. Combination of dog and coughing fit. Anyway, like I was saying, we get a hint of what Peridot's up to because, again, she said she got what she needed, but yet the injectors aren't on. And at the same time, however, we get a clue that something is up. Especially since when Steven and Garnet went to investigate, they found the artificial fusions, as I'm going to call them. Even Peridot made comments about how many of these things were seeming to be stable, and that a few seem to be coming out early. So clearly they have to do with what she wants, with what she's hoping to accomplish. But why would she unleash them? Why would she intentionally release these things out into the world? Why would she want to examine them? We don't know. But at the same time, it still leaves us wondering, because clearly she's okay with just leaving evidence behind. So what's her end goal? We don't know, but we still get... So we're offered a hint, and also offered a new enemy type, because if we're going by the video op that Steven Universe was inspired by video games rule, then essentially these gem monsters, as I'm going to call them, or gem mutants, I think that's what they're called, gem mutants. Put simply, these gem mutants are like a different type of monster, kind of in a similar vein to the gem monsters that they've usually fought, but not in the same category. The gem monsters are corrupted gems, whose forms have been twisted and changed, whereas the gem mutants are gem shards that have been forcibly fused together, creating these honestly horrific amalgams that are nothing like a regular fusion. A regular fusion is more stable, and it really does have a more and it has a form that's just a combination of the sum of its parts, like with Garnet, who really is just a tall person with 3 eyes, or Opal, who's just a large woman with like 4 arms, etc. etc. Pretty much all the previous fusions that we have seen are essentially what a fusion should be, because it's essentially just actually taking 2 forms and putting them together into something that's more harmonious. Even Malachite, despite her being created as part of a trick, did seem more stable despite how intimidating she looked. Whereas the gem mutants, they are literally a mishmash and amalgam of gem parts that have just been Frankensteined together into literal monsters. It's honestly really horrific and creepy seeing these limbs all fused together like this and just crawling around. It just gives you the heebie-jeebies. And seeing the first big monster as it emerges, and again, when it's in a light form, it's just screaming of all the gems that make it up just screaming in agony as they try to create a form. It's just horrifying, especially when you see it in action and it's reaching out for Garnet. It's really honest to God freaky, and it just makes you wonder, what is Peridot planning? What is her purpose? Why did she come to Earth, and what does it have to do with these creatures? We don't know, but it lays down the groundwork, and I like that. But then you get to the character development part, and for Garnet, what I love about this is that it offers another window into her character. Case in point, throughout the episode, Steven was just being his usual self. The thing is, remember back in Season 1 when Steven was curious about when he first learned about fusion and kept trying to get Pearl and Amethyst to fuse? It's a similar case to Garnet, because for Garnet's case, she's a very stable fusion. Whereas something like Opal or Sugalite was a fusion that really existed only for certain purposes. In the case of Garnet, she's a very stable fusion that Steven has pretty much identified as its own. That Steven is identified as a completely different person from Ruby and Sapphire, and so of course he's naturally curious about how she operates, especially if she's a fusion all the time? How's that feel for Ruby and Sapphire? What parts of Ruby and Sapphire make her who she is, and so on and so forth. And I do like that, and I do like seeing that explored. But I think we'll be getting tonight. But I think what I like is Garnet's reaction to the revelations presented in this episode, especially when she sees the gem mutants. In this case, it's also something that we've established in various other episodes is that Garnet takes fusion very seriously, most likely because she is a fusion and is made from love. In this case, though, when she sees the gem mutants, she is justifiably horrified, not just because of just the amalgamated horror of seeing a bunch of gem parts and body parts fused together into one massive whole, but also because these are people that she knew. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry again, puppy. Anyway, like I was saying, Garnet seeing these fusions together, I think what makes it worse for her is that these are essentially these are gems that not only did not have a say in fusion, which she finds to be a very big thing when it comes to fusion, because it is supposed to be a combination. It is actually supposed to be a harmonious joining of two beings into one. But I think also because she thinks this is like the middle finger, essentially a middle finger to her, that this is what Homeworld thinks of fusion. That they really that they care so little for the beings involved in it, that they are just gonna force them together into something that should normally be beautiful into something ugly. It's like in her regard, it's like she's getting a screw you, a double middle finger. Again, excuse me. But yeah, anyway, like I said, seeing these monsters like this, it feels like it's just a double middle finger to her. And essentially, and on top of that, just to see these gems screaming in agony, it just wanting nothing more than to not be a part of this, but ultimately in just so much pain. It's like a perversion of everything that she holds dear, and just the sight of it nearly causes her to break, because in the midst of battle, she freezes up and almost unfuses. And what ultimately keeps her together is Steven being there for her and helping her out. But ultimately, by the end, when she is able to hold it together, she's clearly shaken. And by the end, when Steven sees how badly it's affected her, he stops being overly enthusiastic and going, "Hey, what's this? What's that?" and yada yada yada. But he actually talks to her and actually says, "What is?" Again, sorry. Like I said, pretty much he just talks to her maturely. He actually does ask her mature questions, and he actually asks about her, not because of his own curiosity, but to help her, to keep her stable, to make her realize. That's actually what I find interesting about it. And I think it's also another thing that helps Garnet out. On the one hand, I think what I do like is that it helps showcase an analogy for relationships and various acts that can occur within them. In this case, Garnet talks about how fusion requires consent, that all the parties need to be involved, have to actually want to be a part of the process. Otherwise, it's just something ugly. Hence what we saw with the gem monsters. Again, excuse me 1 second. Again, sorry for all the doggy-related interruptions. But like I said, in this case, like I said, all parties do need to be consenting. Otherwise, like I said, this thing that is supposed to be beautiful is just ugly and twisted and perverted, as we saw with the gem mutants. These things were not like other fusions, which actually do look like an actual bringing together of two beings. In this case, they are ugly. They're just despicable, disgusting, and I think it's a good little analogy that kids can probably wrap their heads around. But I think what ultimately makes it better, and I think what helps work and it works as a character dynamic, is that it also gives us a window into Garnet, because most of the time we see Garnet, she's very much in control and likes to make herself. And basically, when people come to her for answers, she's able to put up a strong front and be able to be their shield, as well as be a calming voice. But in this situation, she almost broke. when presented with something that she did not understand and actually scared her, she actually did not know how to respond. Again, excuse me. Again, apologies. That should hopefully be the last interruption. Hopefully. Anyway, like I said, it really does well and show. Like I said, when confronted with something that ultimately does shake her, that stone wall that she normally throws up to protect others, it begins to crumble, and as a result, Garnet starts to break down, both mentally and physically. She doesn't know how to properly react to these things. She doesn't know how to register them. When confronted with their very existence, she starts breaking down and apologizing to all the gems that are involved in this. She almost unfuses because she's just so much in distress. And then by the end, when she does manage to keep it together, it's clearly just by a thread, because even when she manages to bring it back together, there are still hints that she is not in her sound mind, because when she picks up the resulting gem shard fusion from the big monster, it's clear that it's not Garnet talking. It's Ruby and Sapphire. They are not in sync. They are not focused. They are of two different minds. One is angry. One is sad, and they cannot be on the same page. And it isn't until Steven snaps her out of it that they finally get back in sync again. It's honestly terrifying, and it offers a window into what Garnet as a person goes through. That she does, she tries to maintain a cool front, because throughout the episode, she does try to maintain, she tries to be solemn and nice, but ultimately jokes around and keeps her eyes on the ball. When in the beginning of the episode, she brought everyone together for a team meeting and kept them focused on the mission. When she realized that Peridot wasn't there to reactivate the injector, she took Steven to investigate further, while Pearl and Amethyst pursued Peridot. And yet in the end, so throughout the episode, she's just always on point, but then when confronted with this, it's clear that this gets to her. And throughout it all, it's clear that while she's still trying to maintain that focus, it's still something that very much gets to her. And by the end, when Steven actually is talking with her about it, it's clear that his questions are no longer him just being simply curious about what it's like to be a permafusion. It's for her well-being. It's for her well-being and for basically her own peace of mind. By the end, I think what makes it better is that him asking these questions, it brings them closer. It gives him a more understanding, and not to how Garnet operates as a fusion, but how Garnet operates as a person. And I think it works on a personal level, and it offers us a window into Garnet's character, and sadly what she probably goes through on a regular basis in some regards. Because while she may be a stone wall, just how many nicks had to be put in there in order for it to stay strong? I just keep that in mind. It's a nice little window into her character. It offers a nice little message about consent and relationships. And overall, it also gives us a few hints as to what's going to happen in the future. So you know what? I do dig that. It's very nice. I love the designs of the gem mutants. They look very creepy, which not only gets them across as monsters, but also does help get the point across about the whole perversion and consent thing, and how it can turn something beautiful into something ugly. Overall, I think both of these episodes are good. Rising Tides, Crashing Skies is a stupid, fun episode that I honestly enjoy, and I think it's probably one of the few episodes with Ronaldo that I think actually works. Likewise with Keeping It Together, I think it does a great job at showcasing the parallels between fusion and relationships, how carrying a good message of consent, how it can turn something beautiful into something ugly, and also offering us a nice window into Garnet's character, while also setting up plot threads for future episodes with us getting a peek at whatever Peridot was doing. So I dig it. Overall, yeah, both are good episodes. One nice and stupid, one deep, emotional and mature. So overall, good episodes. So yeah, that's about it. Barring any more doggy interruptions, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week. Take care.